Hey everyone again. I'm doing all my Synastry uploads, and this one's been one of the most requested. I can't keep up with all of you, but I'm trying. So I'm going to talk about Lilith in Synastry because this is one that is often very misunderstood and misrepresented. I think simply it's misunderstood. Now, there is a lot to the Lilith mythology that can point to some pretty gnarly things, okay? But I've been an astrologer for 25 years, and I'm a relationship specialist, but I also work with businesses. But just so you know, I've dealt with a lot of couples, a lot of personalities. I was a hiring manager, and I worked with hundreds of people, and was able to see how these aspects and placements play out in real life. I'm a very objective astrologer. I don't often use my own personal experiences because those are subjective and not every experience is the same. And this is one thing that as you are exploring in astrology, you will find to be true. So, as with all the planets and asteroids and aspects, there's a positive and a negative side. And all of it, of course, depends on the individual natal charts of the people involved. And why I don't do any synastry without looking at the natal charts and analyzing those first, because the birth chart is how the person responds to life, acts to life, behaves, all of that. And that is such critical, important information that you have to understand the psychology behind the individual before you can understand how it's going to play out in synastry. So I know you guys just care about what does it mean, but I just want to explain why, because then you get mad at me and say, oh, I had this relationship and it was this way. It can be both ways. But Lilith is, okay, let's go back to some of the mythology stories. There's the demon Lilith, and then there's the first woman that God created, Lilith. And this Lilith woman in both stories is independent. Doesn't want to be told what to do, doesn't want to be controlled. She's like the first woman of like independent natures that stood up against, the convention of how things should be. And, we are experiencing that a lot today, and we did ever since back when, women's rights were finally allowed. So you have to understand that in the time when all of this was said, there was a time when astrologers or people that were assumed to be witches would be killed. And nowadays, how times change. And just as those times change, the times change today. And in modern astrology, it's very relevant because as the story has been passed down, it is changing with us today. So we are changing it today. It's all just part of the evolution and evolutionary astrology. So Lilith has a nasty side, just like Pluto, just like Jupiter, just like all the planets. They have a side to them where they overdo it. They're not working in tandem with anything, and it's just disruptive or bad or something like that. Now, typically when Lilith aspects are seen in synastry, I always look at what is Lilith doing in the natal chart of the individual, because I have seen many women who have Lilith prominent in their chart who are nothing like some of the negative interpretations of Lilith. They're actually more conservative, but they're fighters for cause, fighters for their rights, protective of themselves and those they love. They are passionate, powerful women. And they're not, completely sex crazed or any of that stuff. And I'm talking about prominent aspects with Lilith, like on their ascendant or in difficult aspects, even with their son. And it just depends on so much more before you can actually really say how this is going to play out and why it's so difficult to do these aspect by aspect or placement by placements, because you have to say, well, if the person has their Lilith square their moon and in their 8th house, then they're gonna this likelihood is more likely. But along with other things, Pluto opposing will show the power struggles, the sexual fanaticism, and all those other things that are very possible. But I've experienced Lilith. I have Lilith strongly in my chart. I also experienced many transits, and I've been in astrology a long time. And the effects are really quite interesting. Lilith unveils things. She shows us also, similarly to Pluto, in my opinion, from what I've seen, what's behind the scenes, what's the raw person behind, what you're seeing. And also is very much about showing you the destruction that's possible through the negative traits of being overly sexual and promiscuous, because she rolls over disease too on the negative side, sexually transmitted diseases. I mean, she's pretty hideous in the history of her, killing babies and sexual disease and just disease period, and very promiscuous and wanted to run off and have sex with multiple demons and all these things. So it does represent our raw animal nature. Okay, but it's coming from a female perspective of a woman kind of scorned through, like, you have to be, submit, you have to be this, And so in today's time, we don't have so many women that have lived in that time period. So they're not scorned when they have Lilith. They just grow up with Lilith, learning about sexuality, learning about relationships, learning about what they really want. Growing up in a free society changes this. Now, this is, again, another subject, because in different parts of the world, this is something very prevalent, where women don't have as many rights as most of us do, and therefore Lilith can play out differently. You can see her as the crusader, trying to break other women free and all these things, because Lilith is a fighter for independence, for freedom of self-expression, for freedom of sexual expression. And that means just being able to choose. Lilith isn't going to go for a marriage that has been planned out for her. She's going to choose who she wants to be with. She's not going to just be controlled by a dominant force, a man, or even a dominant woman in a lesbian relationship. She's independent. So she causes us to think outside of the box. She questions things, and she stands up for herself and defends herself. And this is not bad. This is very good, and it's showing the evolution of things. However, negatively, if the person has issues, okay, and those can be seen by many other aspects, and why narrowing it down to one aspect is difficult. So in Synastry, in the most basic sense, it would show independence, a strong urge for independence, but also a very strong sexual attraction. And the reason why is because Lilith was the first woman created, who was obviously extremely beautiful, very sexy, very voluptuous, very free-willed, very or maybe not voluptuous. I'm just saying that. I don't know. I'm just spitting out things that make me think of a very beautiful woman that was created by God. So, but she didn't want to be conformed into any particular subservient role. She wanted to be free to do things her way. So this is where all the problems in relationships come, because in today's times, things are changing a lot. And actually, they've been changing really, really fast. But nowadays, they're changing really fast. There's different sexualities. There's different, preferences. And a lot of things have changed and evolved. So, being sexually racy or provocative isn't new. And so, but when it comes to synastry, if it is a person who has strong, voracious sexual taste and likes to have multi-partners, and that can actually be seen by Jupiter in the seventh, and some Neptune square Mars, and Venus in Aquarius, and Uranus opposing the moon. I mean, you have to really break it all down to see what combination would bring this out of somebody and why such a deep analysis is that way. But the problem is that it's willpower, and it's my will versus your will, and it's I'm not going to do what you want me to do. It's that rebellious streak that causes those problems in relationships. Because two people sexually attracted to each other, yes, overindulgence in anything is negative. If you take the relationship so fast forward and just push the limits on everything, on sex, on whatever, and we're going to go do this and we have to keep reaching this new high, then that's when things turn ugly. And Lilith has the potential to do that because of the strong sexuality, because of the independence, and because of the will of Lilith in our chart. Lilith is very independent, and in the male-female dynamics, having a alpha-male dynamic personality, and then having a Lilith personality, it's not that Lilith is bad or the alpha is bad, it's the two together don't work out, because then it turns into a battle zone. And you can see that by the person's chart of the person that is, the sun or the moon or the Mercury, if they're afflicted, or if the person is a more alpha personality, then usually this can become difficult. But also the tendency to push things too far. And this can be because either the Lilith person is drawing out these strongly sexual desires out of the other person, the planet person, and the planet person can't control themselves, and they're, because they have in their chart this, inability to control themselves, or, yes, there are overwhelming aspects that can be very overwhelming, like Pluto conjunct ascendant, which I spoke about, and Pluto square Venus. Pluto in any aspect is very just passionate, driven, sexual, intense, dramatic, and Lilith in the wrong place can be this way as well. But Lilith in the right place can be a really wonderful relationship. We all have Lilith, and Lilith is aspecting, most people's something in our synastry charts. But if we're not a person who's oversexed and or overly satiating or whatever, insatiable, and promiscuous and wild and crazy and all these different things, and malicious and jealous, all the negative traits that are carnal desires that always bring us down the wrong path, then we're not going to experience it that way. Instead, we can be having a healthy sexuality, a healthy self-expression, a healthy balance in a relationship. And so just because you see that your Lilith is squaring your partner's sun, okay, or their Lilith is squaring your sun or moon or Venus, it does not mean that this relationship is going to be bad and toxic and poison and it's going to be malicious and vile and all these things. It's definitely going to be sexual because that's what it is, and that's not bad. But you do have to watch for going to extremes in anything, because it becomes the problem with taking things to extreme is that we lose our desire, because we have to find something bigger and better to replace that high. And so that's why people go to extremes, and why there's extreme sex and extreme everything, is because this isn't doing it for me anymore. I can't get excited over this anymore. So now I have to do this. And then it just keeps going. And then, you don't know where you end up, but that's for each their own. No judgment there. Just saying that the raciness and the sexuality and the strong sexuality that comes along with Lilith, because of the independent sexual nature. And it's not so bad. Now, there is another side, and that is when the person is afflicted with negative aspects, with difficult aspects, with perversions and all that stuff, which a chart needs to be analyzed to see if this exists. And that's seen with a lot of different things that I can't go into right now. But you do want to just be cautious, and you want to understand the person that you're involved with when it comes to the Lilith aspects. If, the male with men and their Lilith shows the type of woman that they're scared of, or that they want and desire so much but can fear, because it's someone that's going to pull out, of them a lot of things. She unveils things, she exposes things, she's powerful, she's independent, but at the same time, she can be wild and crazy and rebellious and problematic. But that all depends on each person and how they handle their Lilith. Okay? So when looking at the synastry of Lilith, you have to understand the individual and how they handle their Lilith, and what kind of power issues or wild and crazy independence issues or promiscuous issues or stuff like that located in their chart, before you can actually say, okay, this might be problematic for our relationship. And that's usually seen by a whole lot of other things. And honestly, Lilith will add a flavor to the relationship, but the planets are the most powerful points of understanding how a relationship's going to be. If somebody has Pluto conjunct their sun, or opposing their moon, or Mars square their moon or opposing their moon or something like that, they can be aggressive and they can be dominating. And if they have Lilith squaring your planets, then this person can really push you and really fight. That it can be a battlefield, a battleground. Or if your Lilith is squaring their sun and they have Pluto square their sun, where they're not going to be controlled or told what to do, and they need to be in control, and you are not going to do and say what they want you to do. So it's going to be like, that's when it comes out to be a battle of the wills. Things turn, but there's this strong sexual attraction to capture each other, and Lilith can often not be contained in the more difficult aspects. So you have to see if the person has difficult aspects with Lilith in their own chart, okay? And also take into consideration, where they live, where they grew up, if they grew up, what all these different types of things, but also their maturity level. When you're younger, you tend to act out more of these subconsciously. But I'm not saying there aren't any bad people. There are, and you don't want to get involved with those that have Nessus or Lilith or even Pluto opposing your planets, because that's just gonna be, that can more than likely play out very negatively. But Lilith in Synastry points to a strong sexual attraction. And usually because the Lilith person is attractive because of not only their beauty and their sexuality, but their openness with their sexuality. And also their experimental side, or their playful side, or their I want to try this or I want to try that. And also the independent nature is very attractive. to the opposite sex, of somebody that, will stand up for themselves, defend themselves, protect themselves, and not just do whatever they're told, but question things and that's really what Lilith ultimately is about in the positive side. And the negative side is overindulgence, extremes in sexuality, extremes in anything, because it's just extremes. It's just rebelliousness for the sake of being rebellious, pushing buttons, being jealous and catty and bitchy. I mean, all these things are Lilith in the negative side, which there are negative sides to that. So I'm not glossing over completely, but I just get a lot of people that say, oh, we have, Lilith conjunct each other's, sun or square our moon, and like that means it's doomsday, and that's not what it is. It's much more complex than that, and that's what I really wanted to talk about, because I want to help you guys learn about this and how it works. It takes a long time to finally catch it and learn it and be able to look at two charts and be able to see like, oh, this is how it's going to work out. Because doing it one by one, you could kind of sabotage yourself, going in negatively, thinking it's not, this is bad, I'm not going to, there are certain aspects, but really with the inner planets, with the main planets, that can block love relationships, and that you can say, okay, I really don't want to date a person who has, if you're not into drama or passion or intense relationships and you're a Saturn person, you probably don't want to date somebody that has a lot of Pluto. And you'll be like, oh, that would just drive me crazy. And vice versa. A lot of Pluto people don't want to necessarily date somebody that's Saturn, but yet both of them can help each other learn, about how Pluto blows itself up and how Saturn can bore itself to death. And so they both need to have, a little bit of each other. And the same thing goes for this. So like Synastry, when you're looking at Lilith, look at her like, she's going to be challenging, meaning questioning, asking questions, not just following. She's going to do things differently. And she's going to be, it's going to bring out her lustful, sexy side for sure. But there's no harm in that. Of being, and this isn't always the case. Like I said, I've seen many Lilith people that are not sex crazed and are not any of these things. And when I say Lilith people, I'm talking about prominent aspects in their chart. They're just very strong-willed, independent, intelligent, the ultimate type of woman that takes care of herself, protects herself. So I just wanted to throw this out there if this helps any of you. I will go more into detail about particular aspects and how they can affect each other. But before you do that and say it's not going to work or there's going to be problems, don't do that to yourself. Look at the individual chart and see where those problems lie first. Or you can have a relationship, an astrologer like myself or whoever you choose, that's very well versed in astrology and understands different many multitude dynamics and can tell you truly what the relationship will be like and be accurate about it and tell you this is what's going to happen and this is how I'll react, and how to also teach you how to work with the energy and what you can do to prevent these things from happening. Knowledge is power. So again, I hope this was helpful for you guys. If you found it helpful, do give it a thumbs up. I did write more about Lilith and Synastry at my site at www.illumastrology.blogspot.com. Like I said, I will be getting more into some of the Lilith aspects and the potentials, but just keep in mind that it's really a little bit of a process for you to figure it out, and not to jump to any conclusions about it being that way, and to just be aware of the negative of taking anything too far is usually gonna, give you exactly what you were aiming for. It's gonna give you too much, too far and too much and all that. So if you don't want that, then you can prevent all of this stuff from happening. But, you got to understand the individual chart of the person that you're involved with before you can understand how these aspects will play out. All right. So anyway, before I ramble too much, thank you so much for listening. If you found it helpful, give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell if you'd like to get notified of my other uploads that are coming. And thank you so much for listening.